G'day everyone, I'm David Reidy. Welcome to Piano Finally, a podcast by an old bloke who's getting around to learning the piano. Finally. Welcome to show 31. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen. If this is your first time hearing the podcast, I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're a returning listener, then thank you very much for coming back. Let me know if you're learning the piano or another musical instrument and how you're going with it. You can contact me at david@pianofinally.show. The National Chopin Piano Competition in Miami has reached the finals. I watched the first of the final concerts today. The second half and the announcement of the places will be tomorrow morning. That's Monday in Australia. I've been watching many of the live streams and have caught up on some of the other performances from the recordings and have been enjoying the different approaches that the contestants have made to some of the pieces. In the first round, I picked my two favourites to take out the title. Both made it to the semi-finals and one is through to the finals. Given my record of not picking the winner of the Gina Baucau competition last year, I'm not going to say who I've picked before it's announced. I'll let you know next week how much the highly experienced judges and the highly inexperienced me agreed. Ben Laude of the Chopin podcast is hosting the live streams and interviews with the contestants, and this has quickly become my favourite part. Ben is a pianist himself and has played many of the pieces in the competition. So the way he is able to talk with the contestants about their approach to the music and why they chose the pieces they did is really good. It has led to some fascinating discussions, and he has a real rapport with the other pianists. The format is very casual and lets the contestants speak quite openly about how their performance went and even about the spots they may have messed up. Even though the competition may now be over, it's worth having a watch of some of the recordings and especially the chats during the intermissions and after each round. This week's podcast recommendation is for a show that I've been listening to since it began. It's Dan Schreiber's Can Be Weirdos. The show generally isn't about music. It's about Dan talking to people who hold what might be described as weird beliefs. Dan is very non-judgmental, and the discussions range widely across lots of different topics. So why am I recommending it on a music podcast? Because music keeps coming up in the episodes. For some background, Dan Schreiber is an Australian podcaster living in Margate who is perhaps better known for being part of the No Such Thing as a Fish podcast. He grew up in the same area I grew up in, although a couple of decades later, so many of the stories he tells about his life resonate with me. The latest episode, number 79, has Dan Smith, the lead vocalist and songwriter from the British band Bastille, talking about his life, how he writes his songs, and about the music industry in general. It's a great chat and a bit less weird than the typical episode, as Dan Smith doesn't believe much that is paranormal. It's well worth a listen, but be aware that episodes of Can Be Weirdos always start with a strong language warning. If you really want a blast from the musical past, in episode 60, Dan talks with Peter Andre, who had international success with his songs in the 1990s. Again, it's an excellent episode that looks at aspects of the music industry and the life of rock stars from a very different perspective than normally seen. If you want to listen to a podcast that is far from predictable, give Can Be Weirdos a try. A bit of an update from the Rest is History podcast I mentioned in last week's episode. The two musical episodes they did at the end of 2024 won't be their last. They'll be recording two more, this time on Tchaikovsky and Wagner at the Royal Albert Hall in May, and releasing them on the show afterwards. Practice is weird. I think we all know that most of what is done at the piano is practicing. Watching the competitors in the Chopin competition talk about their preparations for the competition shows this clearly. A performance that runs for 50 minutes comes at the end of months of practice, with some of the competitors admitting to spending 5 or 6 hours a day practicing their playing. As a percentage, this means that actually playing music for others is way less than 1% of the time at the piano. And it seems like this is the case whether you're just starting out or are an accomplished pianist. I guess there might be some pianists who get to spend a great proportion playing for others, accompanists or piano lounge musicians, but they'll be in the minority. So practice is important. And at the moment, if I'm not working through a course, that's what I'm doing at the piano, practicing. I've been trying to come up with a practice program that I'm happy with, and so far, I haven't managed to come up with a plan that checks all the boxes. I've been concentrating on the pieces that I've been learning. These have been increasing in difficulty from the very simple music in the Dennis Agay book to the more interesting pieces from the Ansgar repertoire. Practicing them has certainly advanced my playing, although there's still a way to go, and there are lots of pieces that I want to learn as my level increases. I've noticed something that happens as I get further along in the piece. I start with a score and no idea of what it sounds like unless Debbie plays it for me. I'm not at the stage yet where I can look at a written score and turn it into music in my head. I don't know if I'll ever get there. I can follow along with the score as someone else plays now, something that has improved since I started learning, so perhaps eventually I'll be able to turn notation into music without an instrument. The first step is to pick out the notes. I can manage that, and then I'll come back a second time and do it again with the correct rhythm. Very slowly, of course. This is done with each hand separately, and the left hand always takes longer than the right. Once I'm happy that I've got an idea of what everything should sound like, I'll move into practice mode proper. I break the piece into smaller chunks, 4 to 6 bars, and start working on getting fluent with that section. Each hand, and then hands together. After enough time, I'll get through all the broken up parts and then join them together. At this stage, everything is still very slow, and although it's now mostly from memory, I'm still using the score a fair bit. Now comes the weird part. As I get better at the piece, putting the dynamics and articulation into my playing, I find that I can usually play it without a problem once or twice, but past that I start making mistakes. With the Fritz Spindler canon I have been working on, I can play it straight through twice, but if I try it a third time, I'm likely to make a mistake with transposing notes or forgetting an articulation, and it doesn't get better with a fourth playing. If I go away, work on something else for a while and return, I can play it properly again. Does this happen to everyone else? It means that I've structured my current practice to do the pieces I'm happy with twice before doing some scales and working on a new piece. I'm sure there must be a better way, but I'm still exploring ideas. Let me know if you have any tips or tricks. This week, I'm going to have a look at the new equipment I have acquired to help me learn a bit more about composing and sound design. I could have done all this with the equipment I already have, but it's not ideal for the job, and there were all those sales after Christmas. One of the pieces that you really need is a MIDI keyboard, and although my Kawai NV10 and the Roland FP90X have MIDI output, neither is really designed for that as their major function. Keyboards that are used for sound design seem to have a lot more knobs and sliders than digital pianos, and so I started investigating. I've bought Guy Mitchell-Moore's composition course bundle and noticed that he uses a MIDI keyboard from Arturia when he is teaching. I had a look online, and it happened to be that the new MK3 Arturia Keylab keyboards were being discounted, including at the stores I normally buy from. So I decided that I would pick one up if I could make it fit into my music space. The Arturia keyboards come in 2 sizes, a 4-octave 49-key version and a 5-octave 61-key version. The 61-key version fits nicely on the table I have to the side of the piano, and so I went with that one. There are also 2 versions, the full version and a cut-down essentials version. I didn't get the essentials. Of course, a MIDI controller doesn't make any sound. It has to go through software. The M4 Pro Mac Mini is quite capable of handling the demands of the music software. It just needs some actual software. The Arturia keyboards come with quite an extensive collection of virtual instruments, both classical and contemporary. Arturia has made its name by emulating synthesizers, and a huge number of these are included with the keyboard. The nice part about that is that Arturia has already done the work of mapping the controls on the keyboard to the virtual controls in the virtual instrument, so the sliders and knobs act like they do on the real devices. Although there are a lot of electronic instruments emulated, there aren't so many orchestral instruments. The composition courses are based around film and television scoring, so some form of orchestral sampling is needed. Fortuitously, Museo has released an extensive collection of orchestral instruments at quite a reasonable price and with a further discount for teachers. So I have a subscription to that service ready to go when I get to the composition course. I've only had a brief look at the Museo software so far, but there's a huge amount of stuff in there, and it's not just orchestral instruments. In the Ireland pack, there are Eland pipes, one of my favourite instruments. I quite like Irish music. I think you could lose yourself there for months trying everything out. The sound of the computer goes to a set of JBL MK2 speakers with a matching subwoofer. You might be wondering why I don't use the same speakers as I use for the piano. It's because I'm facing in a different direction when using the Arturia and the computer, and it sounded weird having all the sound coming from my right side, so a second set of speakers behind the computer monitor does the job. I use a Mackie big knob passive controller to switch between the pairs of speakers. Honestly, it's all a bit of overkill, but I'm having fun playing with the new equipment, and that's inspiring me to keep the practice up and continuing to learn new things, so I think it's worth it. I'll put non-affiliate links in the show notes for the equipment I've mentioned and to the shops I buy from in the Sydney area. If you're not in Sydney, please support your local music retailer rather than an online or big box retailer. We need a strong local music scene. Next week, I'll talk about the equipment that I'm using to produce the podcast. Well, that's it for this week. If you'd like to contact me, email is the best way. You'll find me at david@pianofinally.show and the website at www.pianofinally.show. In both cases, Piano Finally is all one word. The show is also on Facebook and Instagram and available as audio only on YouTube. You can subscribe via any popular iOS or Android podcast application or from directories such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. I also post an excerpt and a link to each episode as an Instagram reel. If you're learning an instrument, let me know where you are in your journey, what's going well, and what are the challenges. And so, until the next episode, I hope your piano stays in tune and you enjoy your time at the keys. I'm going to include two pieces in this week's progress. I'm retiring the Fritz Spindler Canon from the progress recordings. Not much is changing from week to week, and I'm spending more time on the Bagatelle and the Andrew Craggs piece, so I'll just include them. So, the first piece is the Bagatelle in F by Daniel Gottlob Turk. It's a List B piece in the Ansgar book. It's almost even and at the right tempo. It's time to start concentrating more on the dynamics and the articulation. The second piece is Afternoon Snooze by Andrew Craggs. It's from the Ansgar Preparatory List C. It's only the first 6 bars, but it's both hands together. The right hand is working well. I've moved on to concentrating on getting the left-hand chords working smoothly and keeping the tempo even. All the recordings were made using the Kawai NV10 as the keyboard and Pianotech 8 running on the M4 Pro Mac Mini. Pianotech is set to the Shiguru Kawai SKEX in player mode.